we're now ready for our next session of the day. We have a panel discussion now on the perception of women athletes in media. Our panelists for this discussion are Guha, cricket broadcaster and the first woman of South Asian origin to represent England in any sport when she made her international cricket debut in 2002. In her playing career that spanned over a decade, she was awarded 113 English caps and was part of one of the most successful teams in England sporting history when in 2009, England won 2 World Cups, an Ashes and inflicted an ODI series whitewash over Australia. In 2008, Ms. Guha was recognized as the ICC-ranked #1 women's bowler. Globally, Ms. Guha is presented for Star Sports India and broadcast on 10 years of the IPL, with stints at the Caribbean Premier League, bursting into the Australian mainstream with alternative radio cricket commentary for the Triple M in 2017. She's now the lead presenter on BBC's cricket coverage. We also have Ekta Bian, para-athlete who represents India in the women's club and discus throw events. She represented the country in 2018 Asia Paralympic Games held at Jakarta, Indonesia, and won a gold medal in the club throw event. She qualified for the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics following her second consecutive appearance in the World Para-Athletics Championship, London 2017 and Dubai 2019. Ms. Bhyan is the hailing national champion, having secured a gold medal in 2016, 2017, 2018 National Para-Athletics Championships. She's received the National Award for Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities in 2018 and the State Award by Honorable Governor of Haryana on Women's Day 2019. We have Ms. Suprita Das, journalist and author. Suprita has been working as a sports media professional for close to 15 years now, a decade of what was spent as a sports correspondent and anchor at NDTV. During her stint, she covered multiple Commonwealth and Asia and Olympic Games, the World Cups, and cricket and hockey. Suprita is the author of 2 books, The Shadow Fighter, the biography of Indian boxer Sarita Devi, and Free Hit, the story of women's cricket in India, which recently won a national award. Ms. Das currently heads the communications at Delhi Capitals, IPL franchise, and writes on sport for various publications occasionally. We have Mr. Suresh Menon, journalist and editor at Wisden India Almanac, who was once the youngest sports editor and then one of the youngest editors in the country with Indian Express. Today, he's one of India's best-known columnists on cricket, and his writings on politics, literature, and sport have a global audience. As an author, his works include Champions, How the World Cup Was Won, and Bhyan, Portrait of a Cricketer. He's also edited the anthologies of Sachin, The Genius Unplugged, and Pataudi, Nawab of Cricket. Our moderator for the event is Ms. Arshi Yasin, co-founder of The Bridge. Ms. Yasin was born in Kishanganj, a remote district in Bihar, and her early life molded her affinity to speak out about social causes as she understood the power of digital media. As she moved up the ladder of a corporate career, she realized the gap in India's sports media industry and aptly named and launched The Bridge. Over to you, Arshi.
Thank you, Yogita, for the lovely introduction of all the panelists. And just on a lighter note, Mr. Suresh has explicitly, commanded me that you have to tell Suresh and not Suresh sir or Mr. Suresh. So that was a lovely introduction, Yogita, for all the panelists. Diving straight away to the conversation. So I feel it's an irony, the reason why we are having this conversation. I'll tell you why. The reason being is it's good that we are having such an important event where we are talking about the coverage of women in sport and women professionals in sports industry in general. Although, women in India, if we talk specifically, we are talking about the 50% of the entire population. And even then, we are demanding and we are talking about that, okay, why are women's stories underreported? Or why are we not talking about enough women, be it sports person, be it media professionals and all kinds of stakeholding in the entire industry. So it's kind of an irony that we have both the reasons. It's good to have such a symposium where we are talking about women in sports, the numbers, the statistics, the grassroots reality and everything. So I'll quickly, so we'll keep the conversation a bit, informal, because it's a panel discussion, and all four of us, or all four of us, five of us actually, including me, present here, we have expertise in different segments of the Indian sports industry. And so just to throw some numbers, so according to a report which was released by UNESCO, only 4% of the entire sports media coverage is dominated by women in sport. Imagine, just 4%. And only 12% of the news and content and the coverage which is done in sports is done by female media professionals. And these numbers are very much on the lower end. So let's start with Isa. You have spent, Isa, you have spent so many years, being a cricketer and a female cricketer. Although I don't like to use this, a cricketer is a cricketer, be it a male or a female, right? Even then, we often use a female cricketer or a woman cricketer, but we don't do that for men in men's cricket. We don't do that. So I've spent so many years. So how has been your journey being? So what kind of, did you face any kind of stereotype being a woman cricketer and then getting into commentary?
First of all, thank you for having me, everyone, Arshi and the rest of the panel. Good morning to you. I'm here in the UK, and it's quite gloomy outside, but yeah, it's the weather's been good lately. So yeah, just in terms of stereotypes, I guess I was very fortunate to have a lot of support from my family growing up, which isn't always the case for traditional, I guess, for families with an Asian background. Both mum and dad supported me in wanting to play cricket, and I picked up a cricket ball in the back garden when my brother was playing, and that's where I kind of first got introduced. He's 7 years older than me, and he was already playing at the local cricket club. There weren't any girls teams around at the time, so my introduction was actually starting off in a boys team, and they never, so I think there was an initial reluctance potentially from dad, but mum was very supportive. She said, no, if she wants to play, then give her the opportunity. And so they both took me along. And yeah, so I started off playing with the boys. That was not an issue for them. And so it didn't become an issue for anyone else really at the club. I did find problems when other teams used to come and play against us. So parents would say, oh, why is a girl playing? Probably because I would end up getting their sons out, and so it was probably quite embarrassing for them. So yeah, that was the only kind of negativity around me playing in a boys team. I had full support from my teammates. The other thing was actually around sort of being the only girl from an Indian background amongst boys who were British and also of Pakistani heritage, which I don't know, many traditional families might have frowned upon, but I was always supported by mum and dad, and so no one else saw it as an issue either. So again, I was very fortunate when I was younger. I do see, and I do wonder, I have wondered quite a lot, why there haven't been more young Asian girls progressing to county level, to international level here in this country. And yes, it's partly to do with that kind of idea that girls from an Asian background should focus more on their studies. But, the message I always try to get across was that it was, certainly for me, I was able to do both. I was able to study and play cricket and go to university. So I think that perception is changing, and with the idea that now girls can go on and become professional cricketers, I think is huge in this country. It means that they now see it as a viable option to do it as a job, and so we are seeing that pool of talent increasing. I mean, as you know, cricket is such a staple part of an Asian family's diet. And here in this country, you know, there are a lot of young Asian girls who would play in the back garden with, say, their fathers or their uncles, or even their mothers, and it just hasn't translated to playing professionally. But I see that changing going forwards.
Thank you, Isa. Actually, that's true. Even though we cricket is our staple diet, as you rightly mentioned, but you know, it's completely fine when a boy child picks up a bat. But if a girl child is picking up a bat, and most of the times it's resistance and rather than encouragement in majority of the Indian households, and especially on the rural parts of the country. So we will be talking about it in detail, of course, in the course of the conversation right now. Heading over to Suresh. Suresh, we all agree to the fact that okay, women's sports coverage is poor as compared to the men's sport. But what have you noticed in your course of this long career, that why do you think is that so? That is one question which I would like you to talk about. But in addition to this, what coverage of women's sport in comparison to men's sport is a lot on the lower end. So what has been your observations in your career span, and why do you think is that the reason?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, there's two ways of looking at this question. Not two ways. There are two angles to this question. One is that I do believe that sports coverage in the media of women's sport is pathetic, is abysmal. I mean, it's just not cricket, or it's just not sport, as to use a cliche. But the fact is that when I started out 150 years ago, it was absolutely zero. I mean, you talk about 4%, and I think 4% is a great improvement on 0%, because when I started out, I cannot remember, unless a sportswoman had made it right to the top, unless a PT Usha or someone like that, of that stature, would generate some coverage, and even that would be comparable to the men's sport. But the fact is that you needed to be an international. You needed to have made it internationally before you made it locally, and there's something cockeyed about that. And well, if you think about it, I suppose that's true in many fields in India, and that's a larger philosophical discussion we shall not get into here, but one needs to get into at some point. But the fact is that it was women in sport were not taken seriously, exactly as Isa said. I mean, and I think it starts with the family, and after all, it's the family which then becomes a sports reporter or a sports editor or whatever. And if in the family you say, no, Isa, you can't bowl, you can't play cricket, then it's the same person who's going to turn around when he becomes a reporter or a media person. He says, oh no, my sister plays, you can't take her seriously. And it's so the fight is on many fronts. You have to fight, you have to fight patriarchy. You have to fight sort of the cultural inputs that you've had over generations. You had to fight the fact that there's a terrible figures emerging from a BBC research that was done last year, which says that only 64% of all adults in India, 64% of all adults in India played no sport or indulged in no sporting activity at all. So you're straight away, on the back foot there. Then nearly 1.5 to 2 times men do take to sport more than than the women do. 30% could not name a single sports person, and 1/3 picked sports like wrestling, boxing, kabaddi, and weightlifting as unsuitable for women. And I think in that little package, in those figures, and in that, you get the entire Indian attitude. You get the entire, and it's not restricted to India, because the same figures that you quoted, 4% coverage of women in the media, applies as well to the UK. which does far more, where there's far more women coverage for women's sport. I think the fact is that, well, I have to admit that things have seriously changed in India. It hasn't changed as fast as we would like it to. It hasn't changed as much as we would like it to, and it is up to the sports persons themselves. I mean, I would imagine that someone like Ekta here, for example, is a fantastic inspiration for sports persons in India, because it's a double whammy. She's a Paralympian, she's a woman, and it's, you have to overcome two sort of hurdles there, and I think she has done extremely well for herself. And I think Suprita, for example, has written a book on a boxer, and I think that's important. I mean, a lot of my sports talk is biased towards cricket, because that's what I've been doing for all these decades. But the fact is that I know that there's a lot more out there which can be done, and which is now slowly being done. So I would like to move away from the gloom and doom scenario, and sort of look at things happening, but happening very slowly. And I think this is where we need to have a perspective. I mean, we get the perspective right. I mean, I think also that women tend to fight the wrong battles. Let me give you an example. I don't think it should be particularly relevant whether we say that Isa is a cricketer or a woman cricketer. It's a minor battle. It doesn't matter. But the fact is that we have to acknowledge that the thrust for the thrust for the entry into sport came from the family. And I think we need to look at how we can influence families into accepting that, and that their daughters, nieces, whatever, are going to be major international sportswomen or sports persons, if you like it, and how also in some cases you'll have to be pretty crude. You'll have to say things like, look at Sania Mirza, look at the millions she's making. So there is a career out there, and there is something that can be done about it. But the fact of the matter also is that similar things apply to men in India. A lot of parents discourage their sons from taking up to sport for completely different reasons, for economic reasons, for reasons of future, and for the fact that they don't see that there's anything that sports can offer the family as a whole. And these have been in their heads for well, ever since I've been working, and that's, as I said, many years ago. And those are the things that we should look at changing. So I think we should look at picking the right battles, and then focusing our attention on small areas rather than looking at large areas to fight and make an impression on.
That's true, Suresh. Actually, before fighting and coming across with the challenges from the world outside, everything begins at home, as you rightly said. So moving over to Suprita. So Suprita, again, you have spent so many years, close to 15 years in the sports media industry. So let me ask you directly, do you think the gross underrepresentation of women journalists in sports media can be one of the reasons? Do you think so?
Firstly, thanks for having me. I really want to listen to everybody's opinion. So, Ekta after this. But to respond to your question, Arshi, there are few women journalists, no doubt. In fact, but I think the numbers have gone up. When I started working, which was around 2007, there were very few, and they were largely print journalists. But there came a time, let's say between 2007 to 2010, at least in India, and I worked in television. When I went out on an assignment, I saw a lot of girls, with their mics ready to take the sound bites or do a live. So I think the numbers went up. Television is not as robust an industry as far as news is concerned any longer, and it's so much digital. But I think there are a lot of young women who are hence pursuing their careers. It's a lot easier. It's less time consuming. If you know your basic tech skills, you of course know your sport, you've got stable internet, you can go ahead and do your shooting, your live streaming and stuff like that. And I see a lot of young girls, when there's any sort of live action happening, there are a whole lot of young women, they've got their separate blogs, vlogs, Twitter handles, Instagram pages. They comment on live events, and even when there is no live action, there are things that they're talking about which are relevant in women's sport. And also I think it is true that I think if there are more women, if there are more women in the profession, there perhaps will be better coverage of women's sports. But I don't think that is totally correct. It's not that a woman can cover or should be covering only sports of her gender, right? I've covered a lot of male sport. A lot of male journalists have covered women's sports as well. So I don't think there is like a straight up distinction that yes, you cover a sport or the coverage sort of numbers go up, basis gender. But I do think that larger number of women journalists would perhaps play a significant role in having better coverage of women's sports, in India.
Even talking about the kind of news or the kind of content which we do around women in sport in general. So we have seen that although this entire gap is reducing, but we have seen that the greater focus is on around the physical attractiveness and style of playing, and rather than having more focus on the athletic skill set of the particular sports person. So have you come across any kind of situation, Suprita, in your career that, okay, we all know that there are two ways of looking at doing any particular story: a story which you want to do it, or probably a story which, at times you feel that, okay, this might work, this might not work. So do you think that this can be one of the reason?
Do you mean if I faced any sort of bias? The
No,
question is not entirely clear.
when you do story on any of the female sports persons across any sport, we have seen, for example, let's say when Sania Mirza started playing, all this entire debate, although it was not at all a healthy debate around her dress, the skirt she's wearing, these kind of, like, we don't talk about men's sports person, what kind of dresses they are wearing, right?
Yeah.
So this is something which actually takes away the entire focus of the conversation, which should be,
Right.
we are supposed to talk about Sania's match and not what she is wearing, right?
Yeah. So you used to sort of see a lot of this and read a lot of this on the internet. What the length of her skirt is, should she be wearing? There was a lot of these kind of articles. I remember reading about Jwala Gupta as well. And Isha's here, so I'm going to mention this. It was terrible when I was researching for one of my articles, and I think this is around the time when you had just started your commentary and being a part of the studio panel in the IPL. So this must be around 2012. 11, 12, I think around that time. And I read articles on the internet about how she pulled in the numbers and upped the glam quotient on that show, on that panel, without even, and the paragraph started by saying not only does she score very high on the glamour quotient, but her knowledge of cricket comes in very handy. Okay, I was shocked beyond belief, and I'm so sorry you're having to hear this. But and the funniest part of this was this article was written by a woman. It is not that there was no mention of her cricketing achievements at all, but she's a multiple World Cup winner. And you start an article talking about her wardrobe and what she brings on and how she pulls in numbers for that show, not for what she has achieved on the cricket field. So we've read these kind of conversations. And goes without saying that you speak with any athlete, female athletes, they get angry, and understandably so, right? You're not talking about anybody's complexion, hairstyle, weight, body type, and these sort of things when you are discussing men's sport. But again, like Suresh mentioned, I think women's sport and coverage of women's sport has also come a very, very long way. It is a slow journey, nevertheless, and I do see changes being made. Like Isa and Suresh both mentioned that for a large time, I think the debate and the biggest hurdle was, is women's sport even watchable? But it's up to all the stakeholders to make it watchable. Now in 2021, we know that there is a massive appetite and interest for women's sports. So then it's up to the stakeholders to take those important things like investing in women's sports, having better marketing budgets, having better digital campaigns to be able to, sell it, for the lack of a better word, because women's sport is worth watching and worth talking about the sport itself and not just what, an athlete's attire is. So it's a larger conversation, but I think we've made progress, but still have a very, very long way to go.
That's totally true, and I agree to what Suprita said. So we have Ekta with us. So Ekta, in addition to being a para, first of all, Ekta, congratulations on qualifying for Tokyo Olympics, and we all wish you all the very best for August end. So we all will be looking forward to the game. So for people who don't know, Ekta is also a civil servant. So Ekta, if you can turn on your camera, we can't see you. Okay, yeah. So hi, Ekta. So just to throw this question directly to you, do you think that lack of you being yourself a public servant and a civil servant, you will understand this better. So do you think that lack of women in administration, in decision-making roles, this can be one reason for this entire gap?
Thank you, Arshi, for the wishes for my Paralympics, and thank you, CPC, for this amazing platform. And good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it is a lack of representation. Before beginning anything, I would like to talk about representation. Either it is in terms of participation in the sports events, or it is about talking women in the organization associated with the para sports or the sports. It is totally a huge gap among the male representation and the female representation. It is a big, big gap. And till now we have discussed about the sports, women in sports, and the picture of women in sports, in para sports. It is worse. It is very, very, very bad picture in terms of representation, in terms of media coverage. Everywhere they are lagging behind. But the main reason behind it is the lack of awareness. If we'll talk about sports literacy, it is just 6% in our country, and para sports, it is very, very far. Like when I started my sports journey, one of my uncles asked me, what is this para sports? Is it something related to parachute? So I need to tell them that it is also kind of sports, and where we persons we are having disability, we can also compete. And it was a huge shock to everyone in my family too, my grandparents, my society, like in such severe disability, how she can compete at international platforms, or how she can be a professional sports person. So journey was like very challenging. The best part was that family was very supportive, and I was already into job, because it is hugely demanding in terms of finances also. Like if any able-bodied athlete requires a lot of resources, for the person with disability, these resources are much, much more, because we need continuous assistance for carrying out day-to-day activities. We cannot use the public transport, and there are infrastructural barriers everywhere we go. So we need to have a personal car. And apart from that, there are no accessible stadiums in our country. So it was a challenging journey, but with the support of the family, I could do my best. And representation, even just yesterday, my trials were over, and I saw so many news about the qualified para athletes. No one was talking about female para athletes in those newspapers. We are 4 female para athletes who have qualified for para athletics, but it was all about male athletes. Yes, they have performed better than us. They are among They are having a better ranking than us, but still we are also selected, but there are no mention about the female para athletes. And the thing will change with the media coverage, and things are getting better. Like in Rio, it was just 3 females and there were 16 males in Rio Paralympics. And today also in para athletics, the finalist is not out yet. And we are having just 4 females and 20 male participants who have qualified for Tokyo Paralympics. So there's a huge gap in the representation at sports level, and underrepresentation in media also. Like inclusion is still not a part. Like diversity is still not accepted. Diversity of gender is not accepted yet. Diversity of disability is not accepted yet. And you will be surprised to know, like only 0.06%, that too at the international level, there was media coverage for the females. And the scenario in India is much worse. And coverage it is like passport size photos are attached. Either photos are not attached, a small news will be there. And even if the news is there, that is also size of passport size photo. So there are not mention about the stories. It is just no national games are covered. वो भी तभी होता है, like we have achieved something at international platforms, only then the news is covered. So yes, female para athletes or the para sports, both are lagging behind in our current scenario.
Yeah, Ekta, actually that's a very sorry state of affair. And at times I feel like because we all, although so 3 of us, Suresh, Suprita, and me, we are having the media background, and I am particularly in digital. And so I'm sure all of us are trying in whatever capacity we can. Like now, my entire team is gearing up for Olympics, but at the same time, we have a separate and a special plan for covering Paralympics too, because it is so important. Even if you type Ekta Bian on the internet, the story which Bridge has done, that pops up, that I'm a civil servant, and I really feel good. Maybe that story has not given us thousands of page views in terms of numbers, but then the satisfaction which we get to bring these kind of stories, that is immense, and we really feel good about that. We'll keep doing it, Ekta, and Suprita and Suresh. I think it is our responsibility as well to talk about para athletes and para sports persons and their challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the Bridge is covering a lot about the para sports and the Paralympics, and we are really grateful for it.
Yeah, thank you, Ekta. So Isa, moving over to you, we all know. See, it's a circle. We all know that women sports get less coverage, and the reason which we get that they don't generate revenue as compared to the men's, and it's a cycle, and every element is interrelated to each other. So how this entire cycle of getting revenue from broadcasting, and we don't even see women sports being broadcasted in a proper way. It's always an add-on to the men's game, right? Even the deals which are being closed between the broadcasters and the sponsors and the companies, it's not like that. So what do you think can be the solution? I know that there is no yes or no kind of a response to this question, but what best can we do?
Yeah, I think it's all a journey, and you talk about the cycle needs to be broken. It's a chicken and egg sort of scenario. In the UK, there was a dilemma that broadcasters didn't want to cover a women's match because they weren't getting people watching at the ground, so it didn't look great on television. But you're not going to get people down to the grounds unless you're getting that visibility and generating that interest. So I think a lot of it came down to the government actually saying, right, we need to cover more women's sport. And that came on the back of the 2012 Olympics, which was hugely noticeable, the support that individual female athletes were getting at that event specifically, and the way they were talked about as well. They weren't being objectified, they were really championed and talking about their skills specifically. And broadcasters broke the cycle as well. So our governing body, the England and Wales Cricket Board, decided to market the game more. As a result, we were getting, women's games sold out. Chelmsford, Taunton, Bristol, all these places have been really good for women's cricket. They're 3,000 to 4,000 capacity, and they generally always sell out. So Hove as well, and the broadcasters coming on board, making a commitment, saying we're going to cover every single women's game, I think was huge. And when you make that commitment, you can't go backwards. It was a similar thing for the ICC Women's World Cup 2017, where the ICC decided they were going to cover every women's match, whether it was live on television or covered digitally. And from that point on, you can't go back from that. So that is the step that needs to be taken. Just going back in time, I remember 2009, the inaugural T20 World Cup, and we made the final. The England women's team made the final. The men got knocked out a little bit earlier. And I remember being on the bus, driving to the ground, and going past a couple of pubs who were advertising the Pakistan-Sri Lanka men's T20 match, saying that was like the prime that was the prime match for that day, and no mention of the England women's team, and we're in England, and basically that you still have a national team that are in a final, but you're just not promoting it. To now, whereby you've got one of the most watched women's events at the T20 World Cup just recently at the MCG, nearly breaking the record for attendance at a women's match. It's standalone. It's become a standalone event, and it's all because of this journey, which initially they saw it as a way to get eyeballs by having the women's game on the same day as the men. The semi-finals, the finals, all being covered on the same day as the men. The broadcasters, it was easier for them financially, because they could set up the cameras for the same pitch, and essentially that was the first step, was getting that visibility, getting those eyeballs. And then when you start to get that momentum, that's when you can start to kind of pull away and become a bit more standalone. You can start then targeting commercial sponsors specifically for women's sport. And that's certainly something I've seen across the world globally. In Australia, they do it incredibly well, where they now have a designated period of time for the WBBL, which gets incredible viewership this year, even more so than ever, across both free to air on Channel 7 and also on Fox as well, who do an incredible job of covering the women's game. In the UK, Sky have committed to women's cricket, as well as the BBC now, who are covering a lot of live matches. So we've got 2 live games on television, which again, it brings in incredible viewership. So last year, I mean, it's not the same numbers as India, but we're getting 1.5 million people watching women's sport and women's cricket, which is huge in our country. Another example is football. So I don't know the figures exactly, but probably 10 years ago, broadcasters were having to pay women's football was having to pay broadcasters to have their sport shown on television. It's just been sold, I think it was last year, to a record number, millions. Broadcasters paying millions to show the Women's Premier League, which, that shows how far it's come in the last 10 years. And that's through being able to get that visibility and making it a commodity. And I think that's the way forwards, really. You've got to have the broadcasters on board. You've got to have governments on board to want to show women's sport. And I think you're right. The media do have a role to play in terms of how we portray women's sport, not objectifying women. I think, we've talked about the societal pressure to conform to gender norms. But when you have so many men at the helm, there's this idea that women's sport needs to conform to the male ideal. So that's why it is important to have women in the commentary box, women in positions of power to be able to just have those conversations with men, and say what is okay and what is not okay. Sometimes it's, you know, it's not necessarily ignorance, but it's not wanting to say the wrong thing, and inevitably that it helps when you have a woman around to be able to kind of almost guide you through it. But I think that is becoming normalized now as well, women in broadcast. So as a commentator, I think they're getting used to hearing female voices. People are getting used to hearing female voices. It's not as much as an issue. And that comes over time of doing it lots and lots. So it all works hand in hand. And I think it's also really important to have men speaking about the women's game. You know, but when Virat Kohli is tweeting about the Indian women's team, that has a huge knock-on effect to a lot of people in India, because they look up to him and they see him as, you know, well, they basically see him as a god. So anything he says or does is, you know, will influence the way they think about things. And we talk about families wanting to change the perception of families. That comes from media and how women are portrayed in the media. That it's okay to be different as well. I think there's this idea sometimes that women have to look a certain way, they have to act in a certain way, but actually, as long as they're playing sport in the right way, I think that is what it's all about. So there's a lot there. and just going back to your comments, Suprita, about how I was viewed when I came into the IPL, you know, I will put my hand up and say I was probably a bit naive then, and I didn't know what I was supposed to wear. I didn't know how I was supposed to look compared to now. So I was kind of being led by other people in a way, and being told, oh, this is what you should wear, or, you know, having makeup put on me, and going through a whole season of the IPL and then coming to the end of it and then deciding, actually, maybe I should just watch it back and see what it looks like, because I had my cousin saying you're wearing too much makeup and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, they're actually caking it on my face. But that's something I wasn't really aware of at the time. So that comes with experience. It comes with knowing yourself a bit more. And I think now I feel in a position where I can wear the clothes that I want to wear and that make me feel comfortable. That's not, you know, me thinking that I need to conform to being a certain way, that I have to wear, you know, skimpy outfits and things like that. It's genuinely, you know, I feel comfortable in what I do as a job, but also in what I'm wearing as well. And I think young girls coming through playing cricket, because they're getting more time on television, because they're doing more interviews, I think they're just better prepared. The players are better prepared for life after cricket, or if they're going to go into broadcast, and they're just a bit more aware of themselves as well because of social media and, you know, what they're putting out there into the mainstream. So there's a lot of things there, but hopefully I've covered a few of those points.
Yes, Isa. Thank you for that detailed, you know, conversation around the coverage. So, Suresh, moving over to you, this entire media coverage also leads to eventually, you know, brand endorsements and sponsorships, which comes to the athlete. And if you see, like, you just type top 10 richest sports person in India, most of them will be the cricketers. And so you have followed cricket for the longest time, and we want to hear from you that there is so much of gap. See the gap between, let's say, earnings. Obviously, Kohli is, as Isa said, he's a godlike figure here. See the earnings, see the difference between his earnings and, let's say, Mithali Raj, for that matter. Although we are kind of comforting ourselves, seeing that, okay, young players like Jemima and you know, Smriti Mandhana, they are getting good kind of brand endorsements. It feels good. It feels good to see that brands are taking interest in these names. But it also feels bad that if this is the speed, if this is the pace, then how many years, maybe 200, 300 years more to reach a position where, we can demand, a female sports person can demand equal money value. Over to you, sir.
Well, basically, I mean, I'll start from a different perspective. Basically, I don't think we should look at the government for help in these matters, and I'll tell you why. It's very simple. The government has other things on its plate. It's got to deal with poverty. It's got to deal with 25 other things. So to expect the government to focus its attention on sport in general, and then, I'm not even talking about women's sport. I'm saying sport in general is I think is a bit ambitious. But the role of the government is to keep out of the way, which they do not do except in the case of cricket. And that's because cricket generates its own funds. So the team that sort of should put things together is the administration, the players, and the media. And the administration now has to be, it's taken a while, but the administration has to become more professional. The administration has to use a phrase you used earlier, has to sell the sport. And apart from cricket, no other administration is doing that. And there has to be a certain amount of, I think there has to be a certain amount of responsibility on the players for the advancement of their specific sport. You need players who are persons, speakers for their sports. And I don't see a lot of that happening, except again, women's cricket, which is again now moving away from the rest of women's sports as a well-run, professionally run. It's all coming together. You've got the players, you've got the administration, and it's all working out much better than, say, women's athletics or the para athletes. Because it's done much better. It is now been taken over by the BCCI. This wasn't happening earlier. So I'm a bit unsure about this question of whether an administrative setup with merely women in it or merely men in it, can run their respective sports. I think it has to be a mixture. I think it has to be a coming together of various different ideas, personalities, before you can actually sit down and say, okay, let's have a discussion on this. This is the way to go. What I find quite often is that, and this applies equally to the men too, is that sportsmen in India generally do not see it as their responsibility to be spokespersons of their sport. And I think that is affecting things in some way, because exactly as Virat can speak up for the men, I think there has to be and again I come back to Ekta. Ekta has to speak up for the Paralympians, and she has done that. She's doing that, and she has to whip up enough interest among her own group first before it can be translated, before it can be transferred to the higher authorities and to the public in general. And I think a lot of our athletes fall short in this. They do not see it as important that they represent their sport. And let's leave cricket out of this for the moment. And it holds true for our footballers. It holds true for our hockey players. When was the last time a hockey player said anything that gave us an impression that he was an intelligent man who cares for his sport? We don't. Okay, partly it's because the administration doesn't allow it. So then again, we come back to the thing of having the right people in administration, and the media comes in because, I mean, the media can often upset things because they're not looking for good stories. They're not looking for stories where it says so and so's done well, so and so's is a civil servant, has academically brilliant apart from being a sports person. The media looks for a different set of stories. So it's a whole lot of sort of confusion here, and to expect it all the ducks to fall in a straight line, and I think is a bit ambitious. So what we need to look at basically is that once you're in a position where you can make a difference, use that position well. And I do not see our sports persons doing that. I mean, again, as I mentioned, except for a handful, and it needs far more than that. It needs far more focus. It needs far more work. It needs a better organizational setup for these things, and then you have the to quote Isa. I mean, I think the skimpy outfit phase of our television commentary team is now in the past. It's not only in the past; it's passé. I mean, it doesn't even occur to us. But initially, don't forget, that was how it started. The early women commentators were specifically asked to dress in a particular way to attract eyeballs. So I don't know. I mean, it's easy for us to get on our moral high ground now and say that was all wrong, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe that's what attracted eyeballs. And then the serious stuff came along, and people took the television commentary and television coverage of women's sport more seriously. So it's a whole lot of things that are not very precise in these matters, because after all, we're dealing with human beings, and we're dealing with well-entrenched, very powerful patriarchal sort of and cultural sort of ethos, and it's difficult to get rid of that. And when that happens, you mentioned Sania's initial problems, but now nobody talks about Sania or Sindhu or anybody in quite the same way. I think, unfortunate as it is, I think what has happened in the Indian situation is that women sports people have to go through sadly go through a period of skimpy outfit mentality before they can emerge from that and be taken more seriously for what they are. And I think that is happening now. And I think I feel far more hopeful and far more positive about that happening and continuing to happen than I was, say, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And the women who have caused this to happen. And once you ignore the parts of the women's sport that ought to be ignored by all rights, and focus on the sport itself, which is beginning to happen, then I think all these things that we are hoping for will come to pass. Again, it's slow. Again, it's taking its time. Again, it's got a whole lot of hurdles. But I think we are moving forward.
Yeah, Isa, you had raised your hand.
Yeah, sorry. I think we've still got a little way to go with that, because I still know presenters who are asked to wear a certain thing for their shows. But it is getting better. In terms of the players, I think women traditionally have felt this idea that we need to be grateful for what we have and potentially not kind of rock the boat too much. And I still think that is a mentality that is quite prominent. I think it's starting to change where women feel that they can speak out a lot more. But I just think at the moment, the situation in India is that Virat Kohli is a very powerful person, whereas I think the girls just want to kind of be accepting of what they're getting, because they are getting support and they don't want to speak out too much. Now, what helps that, I think, is having a player body. So it's much better being a group working together than being an individual. And so I sit on the board of the Professional Cricketers Association, and one of our key pieces of work is around equity in women's sport and women's cricket. And that's not just equity by way of pay, that's equity and provisions that the girls get. So they're not treated like second-class citizens. Are they traveling the same way the men are? Are they getting the same support that men are in terms of welfare. And all these issues can be combined in a way that they are protected. The players are protected, because ultimately they just want to go out there and do the best that they can for their country. So they shouldn't really have to be thinking about all these things, but there should be a place where they can air their views as well, that's not going to disrupt or upset their governing body. So that's where I feel players associations are really important, and it can be used across the board in all sports. When it comes to Paralympics, Olympics, is there a body of players that can combine together to be able to drive change? And I think you're absolutely right in that, Suresh, in that, yes, that the players need to come together to make that happen.
Yeah, Isa. So thank you, Isa. So Suresh, what you spoke about is, each of the player is having their responsibility to speak on behalf of the fraternity, which will eventually empower everyone. So with the advent of social media, we all are seeing that each one of us, each of the sports person, they have their individual voice on the community out there. And, gone are those days when there used to be dependency on publications for breaking news. Sports persons, they tweet from their own handle, their Twitter, Instagram, and it becomes a news. Actually, they are creating news right now. So what is happening is that, as we all know, that, okay, with social media, the entire presenting yourself and the soft skills of sports persons also needs to be developed in this entire course. And especially with, let's say, if you talk about, let's take an example of Hima Das for that matter. She comes from Assam and she is not comfortable with very good English, or she speaks in Assamese. And although if you can see her journey, we can sense that she has worked on herself, or maybe people who manage them, they have worked on her. And that becomes really important to secure this endorsement and the sponsorship part as well, because at the end of the day, the brands who put in money, they also want the visibility and fame on which they can ride. That everything comes down to that at the end of the day. So taking a step back, talking about the endorsements and the money and the revenue aspect of athletes, we can't forget, we should be celebrating PV Sindhu. So Suprita, over to you, talking about, in Olympic sports, we have seen after Rio, because of Sindhu and Sakshi, that was the game changer, right? That was the game changer in terms of, we are seeing so many female sports persons coming in the ads of various products in various brands. So you have closely read and then eventually written a book on boxing, and you have seen, like, I'm sure you have researched well on the Mary Com's journey and how it has happened, the entire boxing fraternity. So Suprita, do you think that, okay, at the end of the day, yes, we need role models. We need someone like Sindhu to break that glass ceiling, because Sindhu is the only female sports person in the list of that top 10, and mostly a men cricketer. What do you have to say on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I think before Sindhu also, we've had Sania, who's been an absolute trailblazer and continues to be one. And we, when she was doing well, of course, she started with singles and then moved over exclusively to playing doubles. You could see her on a lot of billboards. There wasn't much social media back then. But Sania always, managed to get brands, managed to get the endorsements. In India, I think one of the issues is, firstly, I mean, the focus mostly is on individual athletes rather than team, and the dynamics work very differently. You'll not see an entire cricket team or an entire hockey team, getting an endorsement or standing together for something, with regards to commercials. It's mostly one-on-one, right? So it helps that Sindhu is an individual athlete. what helps is that she's gone where no other Indian athlete has gone. I mean, when I started covering sports, if somebody were to ask me if, an Indian girl could become a badminton singles world champion, I would say you're joking. But we've seen how this journey has come along. We've seen how sort of Saina, showed the way right from the Beijing Olympics, and then winning that bronze in London, and then sort of Sindhu, parallelly her career progressing as well. But she always had these big results, right? I think she's got more world championship medals than Saina. She's won more Super Series titles, but I think when she won that Olympic silver, especially because India was having such a disastrous Olympic campaign, and we sort of came back with only 2 medals, unfortunately, that followed by a world championship title, that is something truly special. But you will see, it's a trend that you will see endorsements for these individual athletes also come up in and around the time when there are big tournaments and big competitions. It's not something that you're going to see year round. And in some sense, actually, that applies to media coverage also for women athletes, which is really sad. You will see the badminton players, the boxers, the wrestlers, the archers being talked about a lot right now. You will see them a lot. You'll see a lot happening on their social media handles because we're in the month of the Olympics. Once the Olympics are done, and you have the next Commonwealth and Asian Games and World Championships for different disciplines a little far away, the reportage will go down, as will the endorsements. Of course, the picture will change completely depending on how the Indian contingent performs and how many medals we come back with. But she's been a star, but everybody is not a Sindhu, right? But she's not the only one who's been up there. Someone like a Deepika Kumari, for instance, who just, as of last Sunday, won 3 gold medals spectacularly on a single day at a World Cup. She's been a former world number 1. Hina Sidhu, the pistol shooter, has been a former world number 1. MC Mary Kom has been a former world number 1. And she's also got her fair share of endorsements, which didn't happen when she was winning those 5 world titles, which almost went unnoticed. It is only after the London Olympics, where she won a bronze medal, when the narrative completely changed for Mary. So you see how it is during these more prominent competitions, as it were, they're more in the news, the social media handles are busy, and the endorsements come in around that time. So it's very, very dependent on results, unfortunately, which is why you see that inconsistency.
Yeah, that's true. And probably the another reason can be with time, we are seeing that this entire industry, like although sports is not recognized as an industry, but it is becoming mature with every passing day. Like now we have companies who are working towards securing endorsements, and we have companies who does PR and social media and all of that. And that is very, very important for, all these athletes for securing the kind of contracts and the deals which they get. I would love to emphasize on the fact that in the last 5-7 years, we have seen the rise of documentaries and movies which are being made on the lives of female sportsperson, and that has really helped. Talking about Deepika Kumari, so there's a brilliant documentary on Netflix called Ladies First or Ladies Special, that's the name. And although again I am not very sure what percentage of mass have watched that documentary in India, but it's a well-made documentary. And then we have seen the movie Mary Kom, it did well. And then there's this upcoming movie on Mithali's life, and we saw the movie on Saina, and even on Sania Mirza movie is coming up. So all these things, putting up together is the waiting for change collectively. So that's how I would love to portray it. Moving over to women in para sports, and I understand, Ekta, that, and I'm very much aware of the fact that brand endorsements in para sports, in and female para sports, it's I would love to call it zero. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ekta.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I would like to continue from the past 2 questions asked by you. For a good sports progress, we must be having a good sports policy, especially for the athletics or the games which are not much highlighted in media. So mainly para sports, we completely rely on the government schemes. Either it is in terms of cash incentives or providing jobs. So we completely rely on the government policies, except few private players like Go Sports Foundation or OGQ are into this field to get the funding for the para athletes. But unfortunately, still many states in our country, they are not treating para athletes at par to the able-bodied athletes. Government of India is having the same policy for both the groups, and Haryana is also having, though they tried to change it in February this year. They tried to change it, and it was not a progressive policy. They were trying to put the para athletes a step backward. And we raised our voice. We met the sports minister of Haryana, and we did our best. Unfortunately, the policy remains same, and we are treated at par with the able-bodied athletes. But the scenario is not same for the rest of the states. UP, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, they are not having that encouraging policy. And when a para sports person is not encouraged financially, as there is huge demand of finances to continue the game, so we cannot expect that there will be progress. And no endorsement offers are there. We cannot rely on the private players. They are almost negligible. 0.001% hardly it would be there. So yes, this is one of the barriers that is creating problems for the development of para sports in our country.
I think the time will come soon that brands and companies, they will also understand the importance of stories in para sports. And personally, I really get motivated because I'm personally like in touch with Mansi Joshi, the para badminton player, and we often talk and the kind of challenges and the hurdles which para sports person face in the country. That's insane. I can't even imagine.
A little point I want to add here, like a simple wheelchair or any assistive device we need, that is too expensive. That is in lakhs. So rest of the things are very far. Like it is the most basic thing to continue the game. So it is very expensive. And if there will be some private players, so things will be easy for para sports persons.
Yeah, sure, Ekta. So coming back to the media coverage of women in sport. So Suresh, hypothetically, let's assume that you have got the superpower to diminish the gap between the coverage of men's and women's. What would you do?
Diminish it. Straight. Yeah, that's a precise answer. No, I think one aspect that I wanted to speak of earlier also was that I think there is a need to educate the media, and this is not something that sports bodies take up. Again, coming to Ekta and the para athletes, is that there are a whole lot of television people, newspaper reporters out there who really do not understand what it involves, who do not know what it is about, who do not forget the technicalities about where what the classifications are and things like that, but they just do not understand Paralympics. They don't understand what it entails. I mean, what a blind cricket match entails. I mean, a cricket match for the visually handicapped entails. They just do not understand it. So I think there is room for a sort of constant education. There's room for getting maybe some media people together or putting together a documentary or whatever, just so that people understand it. A lot of the lack of coverage is not because people don't like women's sports or all these other things we talked about. A lot of it is simply because they do not understand women's sports, and I think there's a gap here that needs to be filled.
That's true. Although the pace of the journey is slow, but we have to keep doing what we are doing as individuals and as a part of the sporting community. Suprita. So we are left, we'll be taking 5 minutes more. We'll pick up a couple of audience questions. Suprita, would you like to add anything?
Well, I mean, it's too many things that need to come together. There are too many stakeholders, and I feel everyone has their role. We have to understand that growth of women's sport, coverage of women's sport, cannot happen overnight. Um, it's like, you know, planting a seed today and waking up tomorrow morning and thinking you're going to get fruits or flowers on that tree. Doesn't happen like that, right? But things have to come together from all the stakeholders, whether it is media houses who give enough coverage to women's sports. And a very recent example comes to the mind when the World Test Championship was, 2 days of it was clashing with the one-off test that India and England were playing in Bristol. 2 of the days were sort of clashing. It could have been avoided. It's just that it rained a lot at the men's match. There was no play possible at all. But even the next day, when I opened the papers, and there was a full women's match happening at the time, and it was an exciting one at that, all 4 days, even though we didn't see a result. I saw the volume of coverage on that rained out day one of WTC, more than the action on the field in the women's test match, which was going on, and it was a fantastic game. That needs to change. What also needs to change is for people like broadcasters, for instance, because there is so much of interest in women's sport, have more programming around women's sport. When you're cutting to, let's say, between sessions or something like that, or when day's play is over, you don't need to go back to highlights of old matches again and again and again. I mean, we've seen MS Dhoni's last ball 6 really, really many times. We've seen Kabaddi repeats many, many times, you know. And I say this because I specifically remember in the 2018 Women's T20 World Cup, Harman had played this blinder, I think, against New Zealand, and the tournament was happening in the West Indies. So in India, it was very early morning, and I was watching the matches early morning. And so a lot of people wouldn't have been awake to watch that match, to watch that innings. It was spectacular. She missed out on 100. But the moment the match was over, they cut to some other India-England men's series highlights, right? That kind of thing needs to improve. You can have better programming. It doesn't take, I've worked in television, it doesn't take a lot. Isa works in television now. It doesn't take a lot of effort to put together, let's say, a weekly programming, for example, for how your women athletes are doing. Footage is available. You have access to athletes. You have a crew that's doing your post-production elements. It's not too difficult, but we don't have any specific programming for women's sports, even on our key broadcasters, which is something that can be done. So there are lots of things, like I said, the improved media coverage and broadcast is only a part of it, but we only go up from here, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. We are here to speak this again and again and again till the time we get what we want. So that's completely fine. Thank you, Suprita. So yeah, we will be going towards the end of this conversation. I'm taking up one question from Satrajit Sen. This question is for Isa. That do you feel that leagues like the 100 Kia Super League and the Big Bash have the potential to reach women's cricket to the masses and contribute to the rise in popularity of the women's game? Also, how important do you feel is the necessity for a women's IPL for the game in India?
Hugely necessary. The time is now for the women's IPL. I've been kind of talking about it for about, I don't know, a good 10 years. But yeah, the issue in the past has been getting that depth of players and with the appropriate skill levels. But I just think that they're there now. If you're really concerned about it, add another overseas player to your team. But yeah, I just feel like the women's IPL is ready to happen. And yes, absolutely. All the other leagues, the 100 is going to be huge here in this country, purely because every game is being covered on television. We've got many more games on free-to-air television as well, so it's going out to the masses. The women's Big Bash, as I mentioned, goes from strength to strength. And the Kia Super League has been really good as well. In terms of that, increasing that level of competition. So another big thing in the UK is we've just introduced 41 domestic contracts. So there's not as much of a gap when you drop down from England level. And there's actually a place that you can go to play if you are out on the fringes of the England team. So yeah, all of those things are huge for getting cricket out to the masses.
Yeah, actually, the answer to this question would be that we have to move on from the question that whether we need women's IPL or not. Of course, we need it. The point is how soon it can get started. That's what we need to talk about, right,
Yeah,
Isa?
the answer is what are we waiting for?
Yeah. Great. Thank you. I think our time is up. So, Ekta, I would really want you to speak something before we end this conversation.
I just want to add that media can be the biggest agent of change. So I think they should giving para sports persons also their due, their long pending due. And it is just like the biggest agent, and it can bring the awareness to the maximum people. And still there are people in our country who are unaware of the para sports. They are unaware of they are unaware of the policies offered by the government. So the media should start focusing on para athletes also, para sports persons also. And surely it will bring a big change in the coming times.
Definitely, we all will do our best. And we have two authors in the panelists. So this is a note for both of them, Suresh and Suprita. Maybe they can plan a book on the para sports persons of the country.
Yeah, accepting diversity is the biggest thing. And the players should not be only seen for inspiration. They should be treated as players only. Otherwise, they are talking about like inspiration story about their background, neglecting their achievements, their sports achievements. So treating them as a player is also important.
That's something that was really important. Thank you, Ekta. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining this call and this conversation. I will be handing over to Yogita. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.